Well, good morning and welcome to the FIA webinar series. I'm Karen Armstrong, the Conference Program Committee Chair, and I'm delighted to have a special guest here today, which is Derrick Feldmann.
Thanks
Welcome,
for having
Derrick.
me. Thanks for having me.
Also, special thanks to our webinar and FIA sponsor, Go Fundraise. They've just been an incredible support all year, providing support to the FIA. And this webinar is being recorded and will be available for download from the FIA Conference website after the session. So delighted you're all here to join us and hear a little bit more from Derrick. Derrick, good evening to you. I know you're over the other side of the world. Where are you at the moment?
I'm currently in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania in the U.S.
There you go. And just off the back of Thanksgiving.
That's right, that's right.
So just to kind of go through your background, Derrick, a little bit more, is that you're a researcher, you've been an advisor for cause engagement, you're author of a new book, Social Movements for Good, How Companies and Causes Create Viral Change, and you've been the lead researcher on Millennial Impact Project, which is a multi-year study, and it seems like you've just actually had some new data come out of that as well to look at that ongoing tracking year on year. Also, really importantly, you're the producer of MCon, which is a national conference. You've had 15,000 viewers, and it really looks at how organisations are taking advantage of today's interest in causes to create movements. The list of things that you have done continues to go on. So you're also president of Achieve, a research and campaigns agency for causes and companies, and you're regular contributing to Philanthropy News Digest and Huffington Post. And I am so excited that you'll be coming and joining us at the Gold Coast in February. And so let's kick off with a little bit of an insight as to what you'll be talking about when you join us on the Gold Coast. So as I mentioned, we've just had Thanksgiving and then you've had Giving Tuesday. What have your observations been of Giving Tuesday in the US this year?
Yeah, it's been an interesting one because this year, Giving Tuesday, obviously we saw an increase in total giving overall in the day 2 days ago. But in terms of how much that increased, it's actually a little bit less than years before. But I will say this, that it continues to be a day of attention around the concept of giving and getting involved in causes. So I think that's always a positive thing. I think that another driver of this is how much energy, of course, causes are putting into that. And the challenge, I think, this year, especially in the United States, has been a focus on end-of-year campaign season, coupled with coming right out of an election, which is obviously a very interesting one, which we'll talk about later. And so probably just a little bit different of a year as maybe as in years past.
Interesting. And just talking about people who are interested in social change, you've got NCon, which is your kind of national conference you've been driving, and I love the headline, for people who give a damn about social change and want to turn their interest into action. You've got an audience of people that we're talking to today who are really interested in how that happens. Can you talk about what you've seen and the kind of trends that are coming up through that conference?
Yeah, the purpose of the conference, 2009, we started the Millennial Impact Project to try and understand how and why people do what they do with causes and for good, primarily a demographic of those in their 20s. And it was born out of the research initiative, the Millennial Impact Project, where we said, we just can't deliver a research piece, but in addition to research, we have to provide a conversation and a dialogue between thought leaders, but individuals themselves who are participating in the movement today. What are they doing? How are they acting? How are they involving themselves? What's the behaviors and the trends that we see? And so the goal of the event is to honestly couple those that participate in movements, regular millennials who are interested in social change, coupled with those cause leaders who are trying to activate them to do something for good. So I will say this, one of the core common things we see every year is that the human being desires more to do good than what they actually participate in. I mean, giving, philanthropy, and serving, all of those things are rank high at any point when we start to survey, when we start to do qualitative measures, behavior panels. but sometimes we just don't see the behavior actually follow through. And an event like MCon that we helped design with the Cases, Gene and Steve Case, the founders of America Online, the major purpose was, well, how do we take this population who wants to do good, do more, and move them and actually take the first step? And I think that's a challenge for all causes today, right? Because there's more causes today, there's more things that we're paying attention to. And what's also very, very key, and something that comes out of the Millennial Impact Project, is today's organization isn't necessarily the gatekeeper to getting involved with a social issue. I mean, we can raise money, we can do things directly for donors and beneficiaries like we've done before, or for the first time ever, where historically causes and institutions were the gatekeeper. And so the event is meant to help those institutions who have great programmatic and impactful knowledge on how to make social change really happen. They just need to connect and become more relevant with those movements and individuals that want to participate. So that's kind of what we continue to see and where the focus continues to be.
I mean, that observation of institutions no longer being the gatekeeper is such an interesting kind of evolution in where our space has traditionally been as the not-for-profit sector. Who have you seen as organisations in the US who have really transformed themselves to adapt to what you're finding out and the way that people actually want to connect with causes and go through those kind of stages of engagement?
Yeah, there's a couple of causes that we tend to follow on a regular basis, because through our research, we not only track behaviors of individuals throughout the year, but we also look at the causes who are trying to activate them. Because it's one thing to see the behavior happen, but it's also another side to see it happen from both perspectives, right? The marketer or the fundraiser who's trying to activate, and the individual on the opposite side who is going to respond. We continue to see positive things happen with an organization called Rebuilding Tomorrow, who's trying to do education initiatives in Africa as well. They're very good at helping the individual understand the issue around education and what it truly means, and how an individual can be uneducated to then become educated. So they take an education-first model and approach to donor engagement, which is very, very key. You look at organizations like Pencils of Promise or Surfrider Foundation, all of these elevate the social issue first. It's very key, and something that I'll talk about at the conference, which is you have to create a belief statement for people to attach to. If you believe in something, the audience will go with you. If they see that that belief goes into a social impact area, then they want to see that if we believe in the same thing and you can make it happen, then you're the entity I want to give through. Just because you're an entity that has a great brand or has a great website or does all these things doesn't necessarily mean that you're the actual institution I should be spending time with, because there's so much more competition.
No, that's really interesting. And I should say, every time you raise something, that triggers a whole lot more questions that I have. So if that's happening to you as well out there in the audience, please do feel free to post a question, because I've got the question screen in front of me, and as much as possible I will try to make sure that we answer all of your questions during this session too. So please do put up some questions if this triggers some thought processes for you out there as well. So going on to really where you started with the research and the Millennial Impact Project, what are the key insights you have drawn about understanding how millennials are engaging with causes?
Yeah, it's interesting. Every year there's probably a new set of findings. Well, there is a new set of findings that we have. We've been doing the project since 2009, the research initiative funded solely by the Gene and Steve Case Foundation here in the United States. And now we've had more than 80,000 individuals going through our studies. We do all types of things, from qualitative measures, behavior panel tracking, ethnographic research, you name it, we've done it at this point. I'll say that there are typically some common things here, and one being that millennials specifically are engaging with causes similarly to how they engage with brands on the consumer side. This is a coveted demographic. I mean, in the United States alone, $318 billion will be spent on what we call consumer discretionary goods. That's the wants, not the needs, right? And when you have that much buying power coming from 80 million people, marketers flock to it. Consumer marketers want that because it's going to be harder to convince a consumer boomer who has already sort of been more sophisticated in their consumer buying habits. They're not unchangeable, but it's just more sophistication than say, a millennial might be. So when we see tendencies for impulsivity in consumer behavior, we directly see that in the nonprofit cause space. I think the best example I'll share with you is we had an individual move, because we track behavior, we had to move online from Amazon website all the way to a United Way website. And in that moment, we're like, well, wait a minute, why did they do that? And then they quickly moved back. And then we tried to say, well, why did you just quickly move back? And there were two things that ended up happening that we observed, not just with this example, but with many cases, in that the millennial wants to act impulsively and intentionally and quickly. And when they do those things together, their hope is that they're satisfying that urge to do something rather than to do nothing. When you want to buy a product, I can make that happen in the consumer marketplace. But if I want to volunteer, I want to give, I want to do it, there's a lot of steps that make doing good a harder proposition than it is buying that product. The second thing that we tend to see, too, has been a common trend over time, is that millennials view all of their assets as equals. So the asset of their time, the asset of their social network, the asset of their money, and the asset of their skill. And the consistency of asking for money all of the time versus asking for all of these other assets tends to put the millennial in a very different perspective and a very different attitude and perception of that brand, that nonprofit cause. And so it's very common today that we'll see, say, a water.org or others that are doing what we would say non-financial asset campaigns. They're saying, today I need you to donate your voice, tomorrow I need you to donate your skill, or I need you to donate 5 minutes. And for some fundraisers, that's a challenge, right? Because we need to run the organization at the same time, yes, have all this PR and awareness pieces. But what's really, really key about that is that we're moving today in which the individual views all of themselves to a cause, and not just financial. And we have to treat it that way. I know we want the resource of financial cash, but in the end, we view everything we have as valuable. And once you start elevating one over the other, to the individual's mind, they're thinking, you only care for one aspect of what I believe I have so much more to give. The third one being is that it's hard to ignore the social peer environment that continues to exist. Now, what's really interesting is that peer fundraising has been in existence for years. Online peer fundraising is what's new. The asking of another individual to help support something is not a foreign concept. It's not something that we just developed because CrowdRise or some of the campaign platforms now existed. What we find is that we have technologies that allow for me to socially connect with like-minded people. And this is a very key point that goes into the psychology of why people give. People will give first because they're emotionally and empathetically put into the social issue, and they want to support it. But they also need companionship in that social issue. So I need to know that you and I care and believe in the same thing, because that will drive me to continue to act. We're habits of creatures together than we are as separate entities. And so although we might start out individually, we love companionship in our cause involvement. And that is a very big key thing we continue to see with millennials, is there's a desire for companionship in social issue engagement rather than just looking at it as one singular individual's route. And I think the last thing that's very key is we continue to see success when the organization elevates the individual as the solution and the hero in the social issue, and not looking at the individual donor as just a contributor, but rather a solution and inspired environment in which it's because of me that this individual is now in a different position, and it's because of me that the social issue is going to be addressed today. That's a very key proposition versus just saying, well, we need you to give to us so we can do it. And there's a difference between the us, the universal institution, versus the individual, because we don't give to institutions, we give to support the individual. And if you can make me feel as if I can make that connection directly to it, we'll see high involvement and activation from this demographic for sure.
No, that's great. And I know you draw a lot of these key threads through into your book, Social Movements for Good. And the first one I just wanted to go back on all of those kind of key points is the first one you talked about, this need to have an emotional response and feel really positive. And that example you're talking about of, starting at Amazon, and they've looked at the way that the brain processes, and the positive feelings that you achieve when you're giving is similar to actually when you're making a purchase. And so you've looked at that and the need for feeling positive by engaging with causes over time, and consistency is important. Can you talk a little bit about that and how you've discussed that in the book?
Yeah, it's I always empathy and moving from an empathetic state to what we call a belonging state, a believing state, and then an owning state. As part of the book, you mentioned we spent some time trying to figure out what made those social movements in the last 5 years so successful, gain the virality that we all hear about, but not from the sense of was it good leadership, but rather what drove the individual to act again at times, and to keep with the movement over the course of milestones along the way. And what's interesting is that we have a lot of what I would call people who are belongers to it. I know you had a chance to kind of briefly read the book, or at least some of the introductory sections, and you'll probably see a picture of me right at the front there with my mom, Annette Feldmann. I grew up in a small town in southern Illinois in the Midwest in the United States, and you should know that my mom and my mom at the time was, and still continues to this day, is not necessarily a big social cause activist individual, which, I was, as a person growing up, wanting to find my purpose and looking towards that, I thought, well, maybe that's where I draw from, but in reality it wasn't. I went home one time for a Thanksgiving, not this one, but many years ago, 3 or 4 years ago, and I was there, and there was this photo that I saw, which is in the book, and it was a caption from a local newspaper that said Annette Feldmann and her son Derrick Feldmann signing up for Hands Across America. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is it, because Hands Across America at the time in 1986 was one of the largest social movements. It was the ALS Ice Bucket Challenge of that year in the United States. We had more than $60 million raised. There were roughly around 16 million people holding hands from one end of the United States all the way to the other for poverty and global relief. We Are the World was the song that came out of this. Very big things. I ran up into my mom and I said, why did you do this? Why, is this it? I'm thinking, oh my gosh, this is that pivotal moment where I figure out my purpose. And what my mom then came back with, which is a common response from all of the people that we've done research with, is, I just did it because Dave and Janine asked us to go. And I'm like, no, wait a minute. There's got to be a better reason, right? You've got to love global hunger, and you've been working on it, or there's some backstory, and there really isn't. Is that in the movement space and in the cause space, whether you're a fundraiser or a marketer, you are going to have people that belong to your issue because they're empathetically drawn in, or they're peer drawn in. And when you think about those two instances, you become a belonger of it. And you really don't necessarily believe in it. My mom was not a believer in global poverty relief. My mom belonged that day. And to the outside world, she did a lot. She did some things. And to them, it might seem as if she was very active. But in reality, she didn't necessarily care for that as a social issue. And to this day, it's not as important. We know that as people organize through movements, they become belongers. They then become believers over time when we can spend, as fundraisers naturally do, developing interest into deeper action for social issues. And we have some owners in our populations that surround us that are willing to go out, own the issue, talk with others, self-organize activities and events, all in the name of doing good for whatever you're working on. Though that important structure lays the foundation for a healthy organization. You need belongers. You need my Annette Feldmanns of the world, because there may be the potential that they move up in that continuum. And you need a system that moves people from care to deep interest to support and beyond. And if that system has holes in it, or we see inconsistencies across the board, that's where we start to struggle with generating awareness and fundraising.
Wow, and just going on to thinking about how you create those opportunities in an organisation, because I would say that we're seeing a lot of, you know, as you say, acquisition, belongers are coming in and we're getting big groups of people, but continuing to take them along that continuum, I think, is consistently challenging. And I think in part it leads into that challenge you talked about between campaigners and fundraisers and mission delivery, etc. How do we bring those components of the organisation together to make sure that we're creating this kind of holistic experience for people to have and engage into that next stage?
The organization needs to sit down and say, what are the milestones we want every individual to accomplish over their lifetime with our cause and our issue? What are the actions we want them to take? We usually think short term. You know, for instance, we want 1,000 people to respond to this direct mail appeal. That's a wonderful thing, and don't get me wrong, that is an opportunity. But to the donor, if you go back and you ask the donor in any research that we've done or anybody else has done, how many times did you give it to direct mail last year? They're never going to know the number. That will always be wrong. And then, by the way, they'll underestimate for sure, and at the same time, they'll even forget they even gave to you. And so what that is that you haven't actually attained a milestone with them. What you've done is you have a flurry of activity. Yes, it generates support for you, and that will potentially sustain you for a little bit, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you're the cause or social issue preference of the donor base that you have. So we have to look at it and say, we want our individuals to act. We want them to perform premium actions, and those actions can be deeper knowledge pieces. They can be interaction with our programmatic elements. It could be direct beneficiary access, in which that we progressively move them from small novice education to advanced and mastery level over time. And we create milestones based upon who they are as an individual, not based upon what we want. I always like the we've created our major gifting levels, and so therefore you should go into those. That's an institutional centric model. It should be, Derrick, this is a journey about you and your deep care for this social issue. What do you want to do with this issue over the course of your lifetime, and how can I as a fundraiser and marketer help you accomplish that? That's a very different question than saying, I would like you to respond and/or join the $500 major donor club that we have, or whatever it is. So it's shifting the mentality away from truly being an individually journey-focused organization, and helping that individual say, so this is where you're coming in, and here's the opportunities that are ahead, and let us find common ground together. But you have to, as an organization, as a fundraiser and marketer, determine what milestones you want to help that individual accomplish together.
And I feel like leadership and boards, etc., are so critical in helping to reorient organisations around this question and this kind of future. What advice do you have for those people who understand what we're trying to achieve? How do we start to influence those people who are leading the organisation and making those decisions? Because quite often, as you said, they're looking at it on a 12-monthly basis and making sure we've raised enough money for the current year. How do we shift that conversation with our leaders?
Yeah, I was with a board of directors not that long ago, and you should know that we don't do board trainings and we don't do any of that fun stuff. I know others are there that do that. But I said to them, I want you to think about all of the loyalty and affinity you have towards brands. If that company ever came to you and said, I'm only going to pay attention to you because of the amount of money you spent with me over time versus how much you've done with our brand over time. Those are two different things. If you purchase something 900 times over your lifetime, but and that maybe have been $1,000, but if I gave one time at $2,500, who is more important? It should be the individual that acts and wants to move and really help you. And I think that's a cultural shift. Money comes when people act. Remember, money is an action. Money is a transactional opportunity that comes from when individuals believe in it. And there's so much more than just money in the relationship between the individual and the institution. And so I think it's about having an honest discussion about how we treat affinity and loyalty towards our institution versus looking at it from a purely cash basis only. Hard, it's very hard. But in any other field, we really do recognize consistent actions over time than we do how much money you end up spending. If you look at any loyalty and affinity structures that exist, and millennials are really, is kind of going back to where we started with this, those are individuals that look at that and really believe that it's how much action and people I can bring around to make this a remarkable environment for a donor or for a beneficiary. And that's a key piece. And I hope that we can shift and have deeper discussions around what loyalty should really be today going forward.
And how do you think our fundraising teams and fundraising itself will look in future as a result of it?
I think it's an interesting one. I think I think there's a lot of demands on fundraisers today to be marketers and marketers to be fundraisers, and vice. And I think it's going to be a difficult position in the future to separate the two, because not only and trust me, you should know, as a former board member of the International AFP and involved in a lot of fundraising pieces, I'm not asking for fundraising to go away. What I am saying, though, is that it's getting harder and harder not to think about those two functions together in some way, shape, or form. I think that fundraising going forward needs to take a movement style mentality, which moves them to say, how do we get public to adopt us, adopt the issue? How do we get the public to act for that issue? And how do we get the public to give to that issue? And answering those questions consistently and being laser focused on that going forward. We get enamored with tools, and trust me, in studying a demographic, we started the Millennial Impact Project in 2009. The Haiti incident where we used text to give for the first time happened when we started studying it. We studied it and Snapchat didn't exist. So the time that we've started the research initiative, technologies have come and gone, and all of these things have happened. But there's still the core fundamental belief that if you believe in an issue and you see that others believe in it too, you'll be inspired to give again, and you create your own journey and narrative with that social issue over time. I think that technology can support that when done correctly to move people progressively forward along that journey. I think the future, based upon what we all know, exist where we are going to have millennials that will be giving to some causes, probably not to some causes at all. They're going to be giving to GoFundMe pages and all different types of things. But I think over time we're going to get to a point where fundraisers are going to be very effective in moving people to see relevance in their social issue, because that's what millennials are going to demand of it.
And I really believe that's kind of reflected in some of the trends that are happening as well, because you'll see organisations like Change.org have been created, and we've kind of created this interest and this drive, and we've transitioned those people to their first donation. But we're seeing retention in the organisations really decline much more than we have in the last decade. So that's really been shifting. So it's thinking about how we need to reorganise and create those movements and ability for kind of people to keep believing in us and stay involved. But what do you think?
I want to. I'm sorry to interject.
Go ahead.
Yeah, a lot of people will come to me and say, Derrick, people don't believe in our issue anymore. They don't like it. It's not sexy enough. It's not exciting enough. It's not relevant. And it's funny because we'll go out and do research for them, and by the way, there's another side to this where sometimes the fundraiser will be like, I think we really screwed something up with the donors, and that's why the donor base doesn't exist, or we don't have constituencies, and awareness building has been really tough. And we'll go out there, and what's really interesting is nobody ever comes back and says, you know what, I remember that time when I got a really, really bad direct mail. Or I remember that time when they really screwed this up. What they come back with is, you know what, I don't know why I stopped getting involved. And it's usually around that other entities were very good at designing progressive steps to move them from interest to deeper action. And it wasn't so much the organizations did anything wrong, it's just that they didn't take the necessary steps to maintain the relevancy necessary to keep them along that journey over time. And that's a hard thing, because I think when we start to see donor retention going down, it's like, well, what did we do wrong? Is it what did we do wrong versus what didn't we seek out to try and make happen? Because from the donor's perspective and from constituencies' perspective, they could never really nail that one thing. And I'll probably get a few people say, well, I remember when we did screw up because our major donor called us, but they're the outlier. The major donor, your board members are all the outlier. The public in and of itself is a forgiving and forgetful public, I have to tell you.
Yeah, no, I think that's very true, how quickly they forget. It's actually surprising how quickly they forget who they've given to. And so kind of creating that relationship is really an area that we need to kind of emphasise. And so I guess that leads into your most recent book, Social Movements for Good, and it's really helping us to understand how we can take people through those steps. So can you describe what you mean by social movements for good and just those 4 phases which you've already alluded to?
Yeah, so the goal again was to try and look at those social movements that gained the most virality, and we looked at it from this perspective too. Which ones were successful in either change for the beneficiary, change in social policy that had either money or activism related components to them, and ones that failed, and why. When we look at social movements for good, we're looking at the social change that occurs because a populace of people come around it together, and positive social change. Now, there's some interesting discussions around what positive is today versus not, as I was in a discussion with an academic, my colleagues recently as well. When we look at those phases, we were really focused on how does the individual move from lack of knowledge on really a topic to becoming one of the biggest drivers, and why. And we noticed those phases, which I'll of course talk about at the conference, but in addition to that, what's really interesting is that we find that as the individual participates in the social movement space, after they like things, after they do certain actions, is that they start to change the way the brain operates. Our brain is a path of least resistance. It's always funny, right? At the first week in January, we're going to get a lot of people that will want to search in Google something that says, how can I lose weight but not exercise, right? It's like, how can I get the biggest return but not have to do the work? And that's what happens sometimes in philanthropy as well. It's like, oh my gosh, I just saw an image, I saw something very moving. I want to do something. And sometimes the brain is saying, well, go ahead, do something, but wait a minute, don't get too involved. Just do something so it can make you feel good. And that's that empathy that we were talking about earlier. That's the Annette Feldman's, that's the belonging states. And as we look at other sort of movements that go forward, we're really trying to get past the ones that had creative messaging and were just really good at getting belonging groups to ones that truly created levels of interest to deeper action over time.
Yes, and one of those questions I think that always comes up whenever you go to a board or leadership, etc., and they say, "Can you create the ice bucket challenge for me?" That always comes up, that people would like that. What's been your observation with ice bucket challenge and the kind of response, and then what they've actually done with those people who engaged?
So there's a couple things that we have to remember about the fundamental technology piece around it. It had all of the components for virality in that social network, which was Facebook primarily. So not to kind of go into deep detail, But Facebook's algorithm is based upon the relationship and connection between people. They weight heavier content, such as video, and response rates beyond likes and so on tend to get heavy weight into the algorithm, and so it pops up in your screen. I mean, there's a lot of people in Facebook, so they got to figure out who they really want to show up in your news feed. So when you have something like an ice bucket challenge, which kind of tricked that algorithm to a certain extent, right? So you called me out, said, Derrick, I challenge you. You either do this or not. So it forced me to respond. One, that's a really good thing for the algorithm. Two, so I would upload a video. It's weighted very heavily, so that was very positive. And then three, I continued the chain and I asked somebody else, so I continued it going forward. So the fundamentals of virality were very good in this piece. Now, by the way, they've also change the algorithm to a certain extent. So for those listening, sorry, that essentially was there. Now the third part of it is what's the outcome, right? So we got the first part, which is really good message, really good, easy thing to adopt. Second thing is that it was very good on the algorithm. And the third thing is what is the end outcome? You know, you look at all of this in the end. Did we have a lot of belongers to believers and so forth? And I do cover this in the book because it happened while the research initiative was going on. And one of the things I said in the book is what's very interesting is that we have a lot more belongers and we have a lot of believers and belongers more than ever. But what we essentially had were a lot of owners. People were creating something. They were creating their own video content. So it had just high composition of individuals at each one of those levels. It's a very difficult thing when you don't have an activation campaign that allows you to do that easily. And especially if you are a cause or an organization that you're trying to get attention for a social issue in which they're trying to add so many different components and layers to it that the population doesn't respond. So I think it was a very good positive thing. I think it's also helpful for the field, us as marketers and fundraisers, to look at it and say, you know, what is possible from this to learn? And I think that what I mentioned earlier, those are some really good tenets. I don't think it's replicable. There will always be, you know, like I said, there was Hands Across America in 1986 when my mom participated. There will be another concept and idea that comes out that will have all different styles and types of movement participants in it. In this case, you have a lot of people that participate in the Ice Bucket Challenge. There's going to be another thing. If you're trying to create something to go viral, I have not seen a lot of success in that way. Even the movement leaders that were a part of our research initiative, they spent years working on it. I mean, nobody talks about the years before the challenge happened that had gone through iterations. And it's the same thing with some of the movements that we covered. The most successful movements had 2 years on average, 2 to 3 years, building a grassroots network of believers. And in fact, the best thing that we discovered in the social movement leaders that raised the most money and awareness over time, they were ones that said to the people, you know, if you just are doing this because I'm your friend, thank you, but I don't need you right now. What I really need are people to go out and get other people to come into the fold and or get other people to participate at small levels. I'll come and call upon you when necessary. So they built networks of people. They were very effective network builders, much more effective than they were necessarily a fundraiser per se. You know, going out and just being so darn good at raising money. They're very good at those relational networks. And when the time came where they felt that they had critical mass, and there was something in the media and the general relevance discussion, they unleashed the grassroots network to make it happen. Then they went viral. So it takes years. Virality is not going to happen just overnight. We look at these outlier scenarios and think, if one can do it, another. I used to work for an organization, and I had a board member that would constantly come to me, and because he would read the Wall Street Journal and at home, and we have a board meeting, and it would be the first organization to raise $100,000 online. If you could think about that kind of story. And they say, well, we're that good. We could do that. And so we get enamored with the outlier. And unfortunately, chasing the outlier doesn't necessarily get us to where we want to go, at least what we discovered.
Well, that is definitely the best response I've heard yet to that question. So, in terms of the things we can know, however, I guess invest and understand more, you do talk about the power of peers and really the importance of social networks. How do people start to move in that direction if that's what they're looking for to kind of engage their audience a little bit more?
Yeah, we find that authenticity and companionship in small, hyper-local, small levels builds to much larger networks over time. And that's what we noticed in the research around social movements for good. For instance, there was a fundraiser at Penn State, a big university in the United States. Her name was Deborah Manser. And one of the most successful things that she did, they were embarking upon $1 billion campaign, right? These huge capital campaigns. And the university said, you know what, our goal is to get a lot of people just to engage and activate in it. And so what she did is she went out and she helped people give them tools to self-organize. Because the only way movements tend to happen is if you feel ownership over it. And the challenge in fundraising and marketing is that we're always in direct response mode, right? So it's, let me ask you to do this. Let me do, you respond directly to me. We're in this business to consumer mentality. But in a social movement network model, what you're doing is saying, you know what, go ahead and have 2 to 3 people over for dinner and talk about why you think this university is amazing. Talk about why you think we need to change. But what we want you to do is just talk. She created small networked events and activities in which people just self-organized together, created their own. Why did it have to be university sanctioned and run? It didn't. And then from there, she said, the challenge I had is that we had built so many small networks, and when we did a campaign, it was successful. We didn't know what to do with them afterwards. That was our challenge.
Yes. And just that challenge between, getting to that point of hyperlocal, it often comes up in discussions, well, what campaign are we going to talk about? Because we do national or we do global campaigns. How do we create that sense of ownership of something being a local campaign or a global campaign? And where have you seen that work well, I guess?
Yeah, so our attachment should be to the global concept of the campaign. But our action should be at the hyper-local level. That's where most of the population will be. We tend to think that every individual is going to be the next major donor and act and behave exactly how our major donors think. Major donors are going to opt into the global network or the global message and also think globally because they're at that level and because fundraisers have brought them there. And so when they say, I will need you to give $1 million to this big campaign, it's going to fund this larger concept, that's going to be a really easy sell. But that's going to be difficult for the individual who's sitting in their local neighborhood and their home when they don't see it, breathe it, and witness it every day. But it doesn't necessarily mean they don't believe in it. So we always need to start out with the common core belief system. If your campaign starts out and says something like, we believe this year is the year to make girls impossible to ignore, you're already setting a global statement. No matter if you're a major donor or you give $20, you can believe in that statement, whether you're 18 or 19 or whether you're 80 or 95. Either way. Now, how we act upon that is where the fundraiser marketer really needs to come in to say, okay, Derrick, you said that you believe in that. Here's what you can do, the smallest level. I need you to go out and get one more person that you believes just like you to give $10 or 15 as well. To work and act hyper-local is where I highly encourage you, but don't disregard the global message and theme of it, because that's an exciting piece. And in fact, it's every person wants to believe that they're a part of something much bigger than themselves, making a difference in some larger way. And if you can facilitate that through a message, but let them act locally and see it happen at that grassroots level, it reinforces that within them that this is still important for them. It touches them each day.
Mm. And so we're going to have you here in February, which will be great. So what's your message for all fundraisers out there in Australia to come and join in the Gold Coast? Why should they be there?
Well, I think that this is an exciting time, a challenging time, and probably the biggest opportunistic time to be a fundraiser. I think, we have never had the tools that we have ever had at our disposal to ask people to take and be a part of some social issue that you're all working on. And I think that what's really exciting too is that every day fundraisers and marketers wake up to present an opportunity to be a part of something. And what's a remarkable piece is being with your friends and colleagues together to understand how they present that opportunity to each other. And I'm looking forward to talking about some of that opportunity that we've seen be successful in some of the research we've done.
Well, look, I think there's going to be a huge amount you can definitely bring to all Australian fundraisers, and I'm really looking forward to you being here. And I'm just getting to the end of all of our kind of formal questions. A reminder, if anyone would like to ask a question, please do jot that down in the panel to your right. But just moving on to something a little bit more topical, we've had a lot of coverage of the US election and obviously Trump being successful. I know you were researching millennials during that period, and one of the things I picked up on, that they have little, or the majority had little trust in that the government would do what is right. Just what have your observations been from this experience over the past kind of 12 months of tracking?
Yeah, well, it's been an interesting one. I travel globally and internationally, and I know it's a very heavy topic of discussion as it is here in the U.S. So just to kind of give the framework, this year's Millennial Impact Study, we knew it would be hard to ignore what's happening. And we were looking at, in all of our behavior panels, whether or not cause engagement with this demographic was going to change because of the election. So we started our research in the early spring. There were 6 candidates in the Republican Party side, and then there were 3 candidates in the Liberal side. And all the way through, obviously, the end outcome. And so in each, we've done this research in waves throughout the year. We also looked at post-election, and right now we're in the qualitative measures phase, and then we'll do a final big report of what we learned caused participation and what was happening with the election and so on. What was very interesting that we observed consistently throughout is not only the lack of trust in certain government components, but the change in social issues over the 12-month period was something that we had never seen before in all of our other years of study. One minute it would be healthcare, the next minute would be education or wages, and all certain kinds of social issue interest. But now here's the other challenge, and a concerning challenge that we started to talk about in late spring and into the summer. They were doing very small passive forms of activism on those issues, but they were not actually doing any gifting, donating. They were not doing heavier participatory actions with causes that represent those social issues either. And so we kind of had this wait and see method, but we already at that point started to notice it. And the second thing that we started to notice is that we had identified in our wave 1, and this is in the report, that we already had about our panel, we had a little bit more people as self-identifying as conservative leaning. And it was interesting to see the shift and change as the rhetoric happened over the course of a year. And what was also very interesting to see is that activism, participation in pieces were very high in Midwest conservative areas. And we started to see that in the summer up until the early fall. And it got heavier as it went along. And I think what we're trying to determine right now is this the new social cause engagement piece in the United States for millennials? And if there is this distrust in government, because the nonprofit sector does need the government, all sectors need each other in a certain way, in some way, shape, or form. We can all argue the merits of whether or not it should be more or less, but they all work in concert together in some way. Is that who are millennials going to turn to with their social issue activation? And our research to this point has brought us to the cause space, but I will say that institutions, not government, and not cause typical institutions in the United States are the routes that we saw in the last 2 years. So a little challenging to hear, which makes what we're talking about today so much more important, to be that relevant organization, the conduit to address a social issue. Because we would see in panels where they would care about, say, wage issues or employment or girls' empowerment, women's issues. But these same people who were identifying with that, participating in discussions and activism and so on, they weren't doing that through institutions, and nor were institutions going after them. So a little concerning.
No, and I think it's a really important one to be watching, because as you said, there's been this kind of delicate balance that's naturally existed with commercial government and the not-for-profit sector, and how that changes as people are becoming more individualistic, I guess, in trying to realise those positive impacts they can have on causes, might significantly change the space.
Yeah. And the good thing is, for you all, when I am with you, we will have debuted our third wave of research 2 weeks before. So there's a hint. You're going to be some of the first ones. I'm going to be talking about it outside the country. So it should be kind of fun.
That's fabulous. I look forward to hearing what the outcomes are, actually. So thank you for tracking millennials over all of this time and bringing all of this great research and sharing it with us in Australia. I think we will be able to really learn a lot. So we have the FIA Conference happening on the Gold Coast. You can also purchase Derrick's book, Social Movements for Good, through the FIA bookshop online, and they'll be available to purchase at the conference, so make sure you do get your hands on a copy of that. Don't forget, for everyone out there, early bird registrations do close in a week's time, so please remember to register by Friday the 9th of December if you would like to take advantage of the early bird pricing. This is the final webinar for 2016. Really hope you've enjoyed the webinar series for the year. And I'll be back with Alice Ferris on the 1st of February, and she is our other keynote speaker for the FIA conference, and she'll be talking about organisational evolution, managing change when humans are involved. So please do make sure you register for Alice's webinar, and do share our free version of this webinar with your colleagues. Thank you, Derrick, and thank you everyone for attending, and a final thanks to Go Fundraise for putting on this webinar. I hope everybody has a terrific day. Thank you.